Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Benelli and Robyn Benelli, my daughter, and we are here really excited on the Reiki Lifestyle podcast today with our guest, Christine Miles. Hi, Christine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Super excited to talk about your subject. Her book is What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? And I was telling her before we started the recording that I actually purchased her book before her publicist reached out to us to um, to have her on the podcast. So, as many of you listeners know, listening is a topic that we talk about a lot as one of the most important skills to develop. And so her title of her book really caught my attention, and it has excellent information. And so I'll just share, since I'm on the subject, what is it costing you not to listen? The power of understanding to connect, influence, solve, and sell is the title of the book, and you can purchase that on Amazon as well. So I'm going to go ahead, Christine, and just read your bio and talk a little bit about you, because it is all about you today. So Christine Miles is an author, professional keynote speaker, consultant, executive coach, thought leader, and entrepreneur. She's the founder and CEO of EQuipt, and that's capital E, capital Q, EQuipt, a training and consulting company that helps leadership teams grow sales, develop people, and create cultures of understanding. She developed the listening path, which is a registered trademark. So just want to say that, and of course it'll be in our description, but so when people are looking you up, they know that the listening path is a transformational workshop on listening to understand, which has been taught at various Fortune 100 corporations, universities, law firms, and privately held companies. She's the author of What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? What is it costing you not to listen? Will encourage you to examine how you are listening. You'll discover that not only are many of the problems in your life due to not listening effectively, but listening helps to solve most problems. Christine Miles is a longtime expert in educating individuals and organizations on how to listen in ways that transform how they lead, sell, influence, and succeed in every aspect of life. Following the steps of her breakthrough listening path will provide you with a critical key to your success and understanding. Through Christine's game-changing approach to listening, you will learn how to hear what is said and not said, identify your listening persona, and realize when it's helpful, unhelpful. Let me say that again, because it's such an important one. Identify your listening persona and realize when it is unhelpful. Soothe your subconscious so you can listen differently. Listen with intent to gather others' stories. Replace interfering direct questions with just 6 questions. And then mini reflect to speed up the listening process without getting lost. Affirm to create alignment, break down walls, and solve problems. In business, listening is good for the bottom line. It creates trust between coworkers so they can solve problems better, get things done, manage conflict, stay engaged, and empower one another. In personal relationships, listening is an act of love that communicates to people that they are important to you and they're heard. Her website is equipped-people.com. And again, we'll put that in our show notes, equipped-people.com. And then she is at C Miles Listens on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And she does give her phone number, 484-252-1593, 484-252-1593. And her email is cmiles, M-I-L-E-S, so C-M-I-L-E-S, at equipped-people.com. So, Christine, I'm again very excited to talk with you. I love your book and what you teach, and believe that listening for our audience with Reiki is really the foundational skill to develop, because Reiki energy is actually given to you. But as a practitioner, and then as a person in your personal life, listening is the foundational skill. So why don't you share with us your story and about your content and about the book and what it is that you actually teach?
Well, sure. And it was nice to hear that. Thank you for taking the time. Sometimes you forget as you're moving fast what, just hearing that was very nice to hear. So I hope it was helpful to your listeners. So yeah, my story started when I was very young. My purpose and the passion around listening started when I was a little kid. I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I learned to listen differently both from my mother and my father. I remember as early as 5, I was paying attention in a different way. And a big part of that was because my mother suffered from mental illness that stemmed from the loss of her mother. She had rheumatic fever as a child, my grandmother, and really her heart was too weak to have children. When she got pregnant with my mother, it was pretty much a death sentence, and it took her life. So my mother came by the pain she felt very honestly, but how she showed up in the room was very different than the pain that went on below the surface. She was very charismatic and warm and loving and, lit up the room. But underneath was this really profound pain that she just couldn't let go of or recover from such an early age. So I started to pay attention, and part of my job in the family, frankly, was to understand the pain that most people didn't see. And so while there was burden in that, and there was as a young child, there was also a great gift because it taught me something that most people don't get taught, which is how to listen in a way to understand what goes beyond the surface. And that's really been kind of the single thread of any and all success that I've had in my life, whether that's on the sports field or overcoming challenges or just doing things really well, that I really only had my kind of average skills to do. Listening was the game changer. And as I've worked in business and with people in their personal lives, because I started my career as a therapist, as a family therapist, very young, I was 22. I learned too that this is often why relationships were failing and why businesses are failing and projects are failing. And so that's why I have a business called EQuipt. We're really helping people learn to listen differently, to raise their emotional intelligence. And listening is the foundation of the house. Part of it is self-awareness, and part of it is being aware of others. So tuning in a different way is really what I've developed and designed. And now I'm fortunate to have a team of people to help scale this work and mission.
Well, go ahead and get into it. Go ahead and share, really what it is that you teach and the listening path, all the different pieces of your work.
Well, the problem is the book title. The problem is, what does it cost you not to listen? And I think we talked briefly about this before we came on air, that you can't solve a problem you don't know you have. And the first problem is that we're told to listen from a young age and rarely taught. So we don't even know what good listening looks like, for starters. As a human race, we don't teach it in schools. There's 0 years of education or school systems on listening. We talk about the importance, but again, we're not shown how. And then a lot of the problem is anybody who's had any kind of listening training, and it's about 2% of the population, it's more focused on the active or attention oriented listening, which is really how do you pay attention to the person talking. And that's a step in the right direction, but the fact that that's been the gold standard is really not enough, in my opinion, that we need to listen in a more compelling way and listen to really uncover insight or meaning, not just pay attention. And we're more distracted than ever, as we know too. So the solution to the problem of what it's costing not to listen is what we call the listening path. And that is the path to understanding. And so how do you learn to listen? And the word how is really important. How do you learn to listen in what we call a transformational way? How do you learn to listen to not only understand, but also help the person talking come to their own insights and tune into themselves in a different way? So it's very transformative in terms of relationships, conversation, and both personal and business results. And the metaphor, and I talk about this in the book, this is the third of the book, the last third, is you wouldn't go hiking in the woods or backpacking for 3 weeks and put no supplies or tools in your backpack. That would be crazy. You wouldn't survive. And most people have sense enough to know that they better take something with them. We go into what we call the conversational woods completely unprepared, and we expect to survive. And so what's happening is we're hurting others that we love, or we're hurting our relationships in business and our results because we're unprepared and we don't have any tools or supplies. So we give those tools so that we help you stay on the listening path so that the tools do the work for you and help you listen in a way that you learn to understand.
So can you describe some of those tools for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and for those of you who are watching this versus listening this, you'll see that behind me there's the listening path, right? And that is the picture of the woods. And there's a lot of side trails that you can go off. And the first thing to know about listening is it's not a passive endeavor. When people say, I just want you to listen to me, that doesn't mean that you sit there silent and just listen. We believe you need to be the guide. You need to show the person how to find the insight, or to how to take them along the way so that you find the insight. And part of that is really knowing where you are. And when you're listening, you're always gathering a story. So you're always listening, whether it's 30 seconds or it's 25 minutes, you're always gathering a story. So when you know where you are, you know how to get there. So the first tool really is, what is the map? Where are you in the woods? Where are you in the conversational woods? Do you know where the person talking is? And so when you're oriented and know where you are and where you're going, that makes you a better guide. So the first tool is what we call the map, or the map to the story, which is what you see behind us.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference of, because what, we talk about active listening in our stuff and our training, and have mentioned it on the podcast and how important just that piece of it is. The difference of the depth between that and the listening path that you're talking about here.
So active listening, like I said, is a step in the right direction, and certainly want to be paying attention to people when they're talking, right? Although I believe people are white knuckling it, really, because our brains are the greatest enemy of listening. So we have so much going on in our subconscious, in our brain, that's telling us to do everything but listen. So I may want to pay attention to you, but my mind's thinking about, well, how am I going to respond to what you just said? Or I might be thinking, I know what you're about to say. This is very common in relationships. We already think we know the person well enough, so why, we stop listening on a different level. We have our own story going off, our own opinions. We contaminate the story. Our brains contaminate it. So even with active listening, we know what to do, but it doesn't mean we can just shut our brains off and stop it. Mm-hmm. So what the tools do is they soothe that subconscious brain so that you're not thinking about the next thing you have to say. You're not thinking about paying attention to it, the listener or the teller. It's just happening automatically. So I liken it to you're watching a movie, and if you're interested in the movie, you're going to be much more, you're going to pay attention to it. If you're not interested, you're going to be out over here, right? And so that's what happens in conversations. You don't know where you are in the movie. You don't know what's going on. You're trying to figure it out. And we get very distracted by that. And so the tools have to orient us to where we are so that we can get to that deeper level understanding. And really, what's the moral of the story? What's the point to that movie? Rather than just watching these little scenes, it's watching the whole movie unfold.
What's the symbolism? What's all the, yeah.
Exactly.
So
What's the end?
yeah.
Right.
So you said that it's like a big difference is that you're more of a guide. So then in this work, are you using some of your training from therapy to help the average person who's not going through that training to have some of those same skills?
So interesting you say that. So I'll give my resume a little bit here. So I have a master's degree from an Ivy League school. I was certified as a family therapist from a world-renowned institution at the time. And guess how many years of listening training I had?
0. Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, and I've that's not always the case, by the way. But executive coaches have been through listening training. We have executive coaches on our team. I've talked to social workers, and it's usually just around what you're talking about, how to ask questions in this active listening. I came into the therapy world already knowing how to listen because I was trained by my family, both out of need. And my father was a very good listener himself. And he was a businessman, and he talked about his clients, and he knew he needed to understand them very intimately. So he also modeled this while I was also figuring out how to understand my mother. And she was a good listener in her own right. So when I started my career, first job out of college, I was a home-based family therapist. Would not try that, by the way, not a good idea. But I only survived that because I went in and I didn't know anything, but I did know how to listen. And so I was able to listen and connect and understand better than even my counterparts who were much more experienced, because I wasn't trying to solve the problem the way others were. I was first trying to seek to understand. So I came into the therapy world already with this skill, which is why at a young age, I overachieved relative to my confidence because of that ability. So what I've done and we've done through creating this workshop is really, what are the various parts of listening that really work, and how do you bring it together into one system, and how do you make that very, very easy to follow, simple to follow, so that you can implement the tools. And it's simple and not always easy, because we still have to practice, because listening is a skill. It's not an overnight, and it's a different way to wire your brain. So it's like learning to ski. If you learn to ski at 4, you're on the mountain pretty confident. If you learn to ski at 40, you're like, now what, right? So most of us are like on the mountain going, I've never been on this mountain before, and I don't know what I'm doing. And so we have to help people learn the tools in a very specific way, so that they get comfortable pretty quickly. And then the insights or the understanding comes to them.
Okay. So one of the things that is in your bio, identify your listening persona. So is there different types? I'm curious about what that means.
So there's really 2 things that happen in the brain. So as I said, the brain's the enemy of listening, which is really kind of ironic, isn't it? Because we need to engage our brain to listen well, but it's also what's telling us not to listen. And so 2 personas really show up. And one is what we call the curious detective. And that person is more relaxed and isn't trying to shape the story. They're letting the story come to them when they're listening, versus who we call the defense attorney. And that's the person that's trying to shape the story of the witness on the witness stand. And so we make assumptions, we contaminate the story with our own brains, and then we ask questions that lead the witness, so to speak, or lead the teller. This is most of the time what happens, that we end up shaping the story rather than letting the curious detective evolve or rise up, and then the story comes to us. And again, the way the listening path is designed is so those tools do the work and the defense attorney goes away so that the curious detective can unfold and really come in and help find that insight to the story.
Interesting. So is it the listening? I'm trying to formulate my question.
Okay.
So it might come out a little jumbled. So when are you always, first of all, are you always in a listening state, or are there times where you're just kind of, let's say you're chatting with your friends and you're just in a more casual state, and do you notice when it needs to switch?
Me personally, or people in general?
Maybe both.
Okay. So, so me personally, I'm always in a listening state. Okay, but I liken this to, I'm an Olympic athlete and I'm a gold medalist, right? Because I've been doing it for a long time and I've practiced and I've deconstructed and the skill. So where some of us are weekend athletes and some of us are Olympic athletes. Where are you on the? So I would say, well, Tom Brady can throw a football, but so can I, right? So he just does it a lot better than I do. But I think awareness to whether you're really honed in or not honed in is part of what happens when you understand what good listening looks like. It's hard we're not taught to be in a listening state. We're mostly taught how to tell. And so, and the other thing is, because people don't know how to tell stories, like we're wired to learn through stories, we're terrible storytellers. So the person talking is the one that disorients the listener right off the bat, because they tend to start with the problem or in the middle of the movie. And so the listener is already discombobulated and they don't even know it. So even when you're chatting, and just in a fun mode, you're still uncovering insights if you're in a listening mode, but you need to know where you are on the path. You need to know that map in order to understand where you are. So again, once you have the tools as in your backpack, you can deploy them anytime in any kind of conversation. It just changes how you show up.
Do you find that people have a bit of fear around learning these skills in how to listen? And what I mean by that is that a lot of what you're saying is that people aren't heard, which can lead to, especially if they haven't been heard for their whole life, can lead to that kind of idea of invisibility, or in the opposite direction, they almost overcompensate for it and need to have their story or their opinion heard a lot. So do you find that there's fear in either one of those directions of learning this listening path because they're afraid that they won't be heard?
Yeah, that they will give, but they won't get back almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty upfront about that, including in the preface of the book. This is called the gift of understanding. It is a gift you give, and it's not a gift that you're necessarily going to get back, because again, you might be taught how to listen and others aren't. So, however, there's a lot of gift in giving the gift of understanding. So you get in return anyway. But movements are started by the way people decide what they can control. So, we're mission driven. Our mission is to change the paradigm of communication. So I always say to people, look, I can't promise you that you're going to get listened to in return. I can promise you're going to feel completely transformed when you give that gift. And also be aware who you're giving that gift to. Because if you want to have nose down in an airplane and you do not want to get these tools out of your backpack, or you will be in listening mode with that person next to you. So know your circumstances, know where you are, because it's powerful, because people do want to feel heard. I wrote about this. They're thirsting to be understood. And when you provide that, they will take you up on it. It's very, very powerful, and they will connect to you in a different way. So you have to be discerning if you want to make sure that you're kind of insulating yourself from some of that. Yeah. The fear is that we hear is that, will I get it? Will I get it? Most people, want to learn how to do this, mostly because they want to be present for their family members and loved ones. Like, for example, this was about a year ago, we trained a pharma team, a pharmaceutical company that deals with oncology drugs. And these were the most senior account executives in the company. And day 2 of the workshop, we give a homework assignment day 1 to gather a story from a loved one using these listening path tools. And he came back and said, I got the first unsolicited hug from my daughter, who's now 16, that I've gotten in 3 years. And he was in tears and he said, I don't know how to thank you. One night. So we help people transform how they communicate interpersonally with their families. That leads to business results, but we're always making an impact on the human, because whether you show up at work, show up at home, this transforms how people relate to you and how you relate to them. And it's pretty impactful.
So I think you also talk a lot about the listening is inviting the storyteller from the other person and, giving them the opportunity to share their story. So both, some of the tools that you described, because you have those 5 tools and the 4 steps and
Yep.
the questions, etc., that give you the very specific tools. How does that work with, I think sometimes both people are not used to being heard or listened to,
Yep.
and they really don't even know how to share their story.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that part?
Well, so like I said, we're not natural storytellers. By nature, we learn through stories. So again, the guide or the listener, and the guide is the guide on the path, needs to help the person tell the story. What I've known my whole life is, because people have said, why did I just tell you that? So I'm sure you've heard that before, right?
Yeah.
So, and I, and now I just tell people, well, because I've been listening to understand you. And when you feel it, people bring more to the table, not less. They become more vulnerable, more open, more willing, because you're creating a trusting environment and taking care, and you're not shaping the story. So let's put this in really common language that happens between men and women. And I'm going to say just up front, both men and women are guilty of this, but men usually get the worst of the rap. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So let's just say the wife says she has a problem, she comes home and she starts talking, and the man starts trying to solve the problem. Like, well, this is what you need to do. And she says, I just want you to listen to me, right? That's what they're afraid of. I don't know, just listen, are you kidding? I know exactly what she has to do. How do I do that? They're wanting to be helpful and problem solve and create the solution, is what they don't know how to stop themselves from doing, when all she wants is to be heard, understood. Now, if I had to sit there and just listen and not solve that problem, as a really good listener, I would struggle with that. It's just, what do you have to do before you would dare to try to solve the problem? Once you understand somebody, you earn the right. That's why the subtitle is Earning the Right to Solve and Sell and connect. Because when you understand, then people are more apt to let you tell them what you believe, what you think, or advise them. So this is the precursor to really being able to do that.
Okay, that's so helpful to understand, because I do think that's part of it that people run into, where they do want to problem solve, or they do want to go into that telling.
It's the #1 listening inhibitor that we get reported, across the board, that their inhibitor is they start solving the problem rather than listening, because we're told to tell and we're taught to tell. And what's the first thing you go to a manager? Let's just take this to a business situation. Don't come into my office with a problem, come in with a solution. Well, I don't say that. I say, come into my office with the root cause and the real problem. Then we'll talk about the solution. We're jumping ahead if we just, so much time and money and energy and relationships are hurt because we start solving problems that we're not even sure are the right problems. I'm sure you deal with this all the time in your field. people have a physical challenge or an emotional challenge, is it really what they present, or is something deeper or different that's at the root cause? And that's part of what we help business people figure out and in their relationships figure out. And learning to listen to understand helps you get to root cause so that you can solve the right problem and earn the right to do that so that the person comes along with you to that new solution.
Okay, yeah, and I know for myself in my sessions when I'm listening to people, so often I just find that the questions are given to me. Like I can hear the question that isn't based on my personal curiosity.
Mhm.
It's based on what I hear needs to be asked so they can share. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, you're tuning. I'm going to use the words tuning in. You're tuning into something they're not saying, if I get you, right? And we're not taught to do that. Some of us do that more instinctually. Some of our experience helps us do that, but that's very different than what most people are doing. Most people are solving, and even really good listeners solve problems. The teenagers, they come home, they have a problem. We've been through it. We tell them what they need to do. We advise them rather than helping them learn how to do that for themselves. And active listening, being present, makes a difference, but not the same impact. Not the same impact, because what we have to help do is really convey the understanding rather than just saying, I understand. We think we understand a lot of things that we don't necessarily understand. And by the way, nothing makes me feel less understood than when somebody tells me I understand. That to me means I don't think so. Tell me what you understand. Tell me what you think I'm saying. And then we're going to step in the right direction. But if you say, I understand, I go, no, you don't. Yeah.
I would imagine this is all a part of it. Asking clarifying questions is okay. Like, okay, am I hearing this correctly? Or how am I understanding this? Is what I'm hearing you say, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, and so yes, so two things about questions. Let me add one, questions are a really important part of being a great listener and a guide, but questions can also interfere with listening. So this is what a lot of listening training does, which is teach these very clever, how do you ask the right questions? How do you ask open-ended questions? And what I know is that go to journalists and to therapists and they ask the most powerful questions. And this is what we call the compass. So now we're back in the backpack. You're on the trail, you have your map. One of the other things you need is a compass. How do I make sure I stay on the main path? And we call those the 6 most powerful questions. And again, these are not my questions, but only using these questions together instead of 45 other questions that are smarter and more brilliant gets you as much of the story and will also always orient you back to the main path. So if you ask a specific question, if you use one of the compass questions, you're right back on the main path. And I'll go through those really quickly. So it's take me back to the beginning, because people tend to start in the middle instead of at the beginning of their story and they don't even know it. Tell me more. How does that make you feel? It sounds like you felt, which is a little bit about what you were just saying, Robyn. Then what happened, or what happened next? And then the proverbial which is almost a nonverbal, almost imperceptible way of saying, tell me more. And when you use just these 6 questions, you'll get more of the story than when you ask very specific and targeted questions. So that's the compass.
Yeah.
The other thing you just talked about was what we call the water filter. So when we hear things, because our brains are the enemy, we contaminate the story, right? We tend to, think we heard it in a certain way or whatever. So one of the things we make sure is that we're affirming what we hear in a way that makes sure that the person feels understood. And I worked with a gentleman named Mike Bosworth, who wrote a book called What Great Salespeople Do. And he really, this is his line, which is, do I get you? Right? Do I get you? Not your situation, not the facts, but let me make sure, let me affirm I get you. And when you give that prompt, then you're looking for how the person responds. And now you're getting alignment around understanding instead of, oh yeah, I got it, I understand. Now I'm making sure I understand.
One of the hazards that I see pretty commonly is in listening, immediately relating it to your own story.
Right.
And is that what you mean by, creating the story for them?
Yeah, so again, like you're on the trail, there's not enough, you can't carry enough water in your backpack, right? You have to stop at creeks and get water. And that water is contaminated, just like when you're on the path to the story, your brain's going to contaminate the story. So you better make sure it's filtered, because one of the things when you gather or listen to a story, you are relating the stories that you live. That's how we connect on a human level. But my stories and your story could look exactly the same. That doesn't mean I have the same feelings or it is the same. I need to make sure that I'm allowing that other person to be more important. And so that's exactly what happens. We relate, and then we identify or over-identify, and then we contaminate the story.
And go into the telling of our story that's like theirs.
That's right. Which by the way, can be a great way to connect and bond. However, you got to know when to, and this is part of what we teach. When do you tell that story? How do you tell that story? And so that you're making the other person the primary and knowing when the right timing for that is, because it's an important part. And listening isn't all about just listening. It's also about telling, but it's like, how do you do that? And when do you do that? And that's all around being a great guide on the path. And the more experience you get in the first 6 tools on the listening path, then we get even more in depth with how do you tell a story? How do you interrupt somebody? Because interrupting is a very important part of good listening. I know that's not what people tell you. It's just why and how you interrupt. But you must interrupt. If you just let somebody talk incessantly, you're going to eat up an hour with not much benefit necessarily. So how do you interrupt? How do you ask specific questions and stay true to the path without shaping the story?
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, so you work a lot with businesses and companies. That's very helpful for them, and learning how to, and that's, what is it costing you in a variety of ways not to listen.
Yes.
Have a kind of a diverse listenership. So that's why I was just making sure that any listeners out there that are part of companies and know that you do workshops and
Yes.
you know,
And our ultimate mission and goal is to educate younger people. And so we want to create that movement. And so we're working on developing the game. We use games with our customer. We use what we call the listening path game to make it, I liken it to fog, right? Listening's like fog. I know it's there. It's important. I see it. But when you go to grab it, you can't really catch it. And so we've made this process very tangible, very, very much so you can catch the fog. And the game helps people apply the tools in a very compelling way that's visual, as well as just not with the ears, because we learn visually and doing. And so we use the game, but we also want to take that into school so that we can teach, so we can put people on the ski mountain. We're going to start with high school, but ultimately we'd like to go to elementary school so that they're learning early, and then they're ready, and we're not teaching them to ski at 40 or 30 or 50 or 70, whatever the age is, because it's just in our minds, it's the most powerful thing that we can teach them how to do. And it also helps them plug into the emotional crisis we're having with humans, which is the compelling amount of anxiety for kids, the compelling amount of mental health issues that we're facing, and the struggles. And part of it is because we're not socialized emotionally to have language around that, to listen to emotions, to understand emotions. And this is a part of being a great guide as well, paying attention to both facts and feelings. And that's the gift of understanding. We can't always solve somebody's problem, but we can bear witness to their pain in a very meaningful way, which is healing in and of itself.
Oh, that's the EQ of EQuipt, is the emotional intelligence. Yeah.
It is.
It's
Yes, you
funny
got
that you use the skiing analogy. I learned snowboarding when I was 30, but we teach our 6-year-old daughter, started her at 4.
and you're like, I
Snowboarding.
wish that was me, right?
All right. It's way easier to learn at that age when you
Well,
don't have
just
fear.
think about the ground. Like she doesn't have to worry as much about falling. She becomes fearless, right? So yeah. So we do work business to business. We also can work consortium. Like so, if people are like, I have 20 people, we want to do a workshop, or we'll do that for couples. But we need to come to the table with a group of people that say we want to learn this skill, and then we customize that for that cohort. So again, even when we're working in business, we're also working on the personal relationships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a, important thing about listening. So,
Yeah, yeah.
well, Christine, I know that let's just, say your website and all of that again. Oh, there's Colleen holding up the
I'm
book.
backwards,
Those of you
but-
that are watching, most of our
Yeah.
listenership is listening. So, ironically.
Yeah. Yeah, the website is EQuipt, EQ, like you mentioned, UIP as in Paul, T as in Tom, -people.com. We are equipping people with the emotional skills. Listening is the foundation of the house. And, look, if you think we can help you or you don't think we can, it doesn't matter. Feel free to reach out. I know a lot of people. So if we're right to help you, then we're happy to help you. And if we're not, we're happy to help you figure out where you can get the help that you want to need. So, so C Miles Listens is how you can follow me on social media. And then of course, C Miles at equip-people.com, or as Colleen mentioned earlier, send me a text, whatever works.
Well, and it's absolutely a great book. I highly recommend it. And the training, just even to start with the book, is so valuable. And again, very important on really personal levels and all levels of a Reiki practitioner. We work a lot with animals, and a little bit differently because they tell their stories in a different way. But listening is a foundational aspect of that as well. So,
well, you're the ultimate energy. I mean, tuning in in your profession, you're the ultimate, tuning into that. And so, and this is about listening to yourself as well, not just listening to others. That's super, super important. This is a self-awareness as well as a others awareness. I mentioned earlier before we started that I was in an auto accident when I was 28, and I had 3 years of chronic pain, which I call blissful times, because once you go from chronic to acute, the world is just a totally different. And I was grateful. I had a physical therapist that was like, I was an athlete. No pain, no gain was the mentality I was taught. And I had a cervical spine injury, and he was like, does this hurt when I do that? I'm like, no. And I go, well, it radiates down my arm and under my rib. He goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. Pain, start to listen differently to your body. You're in a new paradigm. And so, it's really important to learn how to listen to yourself and to your own signals.
yeah, that's ultimately what we feel that we teach is how do you get to your own inner truth, your own inner authority, and how do you hear yourself?
Mhm.
So often I can't even hear myself think.
Yeah.
But it's actually how do you get to what are the tools to hear yourself?
Yeah. And the
And
first part of the book, as you know, is really about just that, understanding yourself first before you listen to others. The tools marry to both, but it's understanding your purpose and your story and what's behind the why of what you do. Because when you tap into that, you can show up in a totally different way. So listening to yourself is a huge part of this.
Well, and I love in the book that you have very specific tools for it. Like it's a very much of a, like you say, the listening path. Here's the path, here's the tools. This is what's in your backpack. And it can help you stay on that path and then develop more skills. And even as a really expert listener, do you find that there's the continued development even for yourself?
I appreciate you saying that. Not everybody is as so wise to say that when you have to write down what you've done all your life, it really, I'm even more aware than I was before. And it also helps as a teacher and a guide myself to say, this isn't magic. This is what I'm doing. Let me show you. And they go, oh, I saw you were doing that, but I didn't really put that together. So yes, it's definitely, it's that conscious competence. And my father was 89. He died a year ago, Christmas. And interestingly, and he had a really good life, but as he slowed down the last 6 months, it was fascinating because life's frenetic, and I'd come in and be like, blah, 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 and he'd be like, hold on, slow down. And I saw him like he wanted to understand. My father was somebody who, in a conversation, didn't just want to hear, he wanted to understand. And he would be like, no, wait, slow down, take me back. And he would do the things that we teach. And I watched it in slow motion, which was just, it was just amazing to see how fervent his desire was, because I saw him do it at speed his whole life and didn't get it, even though I replicated it. So to watch it was really powerful in the time I had with him then. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your skills and the tools. And again, for our listeners, I think it's a fabulous book and have read it myself. And actually I really learned so much from it, and have always thought of myself as a skilled listener. And so this just added those tools to my toolbox and new ways of thinking about listening as well. And I think probably to a certain extent in my practice, I have one level of listening,
Yeah.
and this brought a new level into my personal life.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful to hear. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, again, yes, I would agree that you're a very good listener. So, but it's not about replacing. It's really about turbocharging. If for those of us who already have the skill, it is how, why do the top athletes in the world, the number one tennis player, why does she have a coach? Well, because she can't do it all herself, right? How does she make incremental changes to her game to maintain that level? So it's really about excellence, as well as from learning from a very rudimentary level.
And exactly, and being able to have more tools in your tool bag and more understanding of it all, which the understanding is so many people just want to be heard and understood.
Yeah, thirsting. They're thirsting for it, and I think that from a humanity standpoint, that if the movement of giving that gift can really make an impact on our in the sphere around us, and then that can be expansive, especially if we get to young kids, because I think we kind of just don't teach them that, and it's natural. They're naturally curious from a young age. We had one of our clients who has a 3-year-old, and he started using the tools at home, and then the 3-year-old started using them. And I said, this is my dream come true. We just have to formalize that a little bit more so that they can be great humans from a younger age. And just on a final note, one of the reliefs of, because you said about, are they not nervous, or do they have fear around this? One of the fears is that we're expected to be empathetic when we show up in a conversation. And for some of us, that's a lot harder than for others, because if we haven't been given the emotional language, or we're just personality wired to be more technical than emotional, empathy isn't something that we all have at the same level. And I believe listening leads to empathy versus the other way around. And I think the expectation is just listen and be empathetic. And it's like, that's like asking me to do algebra. Like, don't just sit down and do algebra. Well, that's not the way my brain thinks. I'm dyslexic. So when you give people the tools to listen in this way, empathy follows. And so we have a crisis of empathy because of all the technology. And so the sooner we help young people understand and listen, empathy will just be part of how they develop and what will be part of their development. And I think that's hugely, hugely important, because we're going to be in a deficit and in a real crisis of empathy, not because the younger population is any different than we are, just because how they're habituated and what they're socialized with is depriving them of the ability to develop that.
Because so much of it is telling them. There's a lot of telling.
And technology, and because there's less connection in their conversations and so forth. So it's not their fault. We have to give them the tools to be empathetic rather than just expecting them to be empathetic.
And so you are developing that game, and is that developing or developed?
It's developed from a organizational perspective. From a school perspective, we're still in process.
Okay.
Yeah. So we believe it'll be ready by the end of this year.
And is that something also on Amazon, or is that
No,
going
not yet.
to be strictly for schools?
Yeah. Well, right now it's part. If you're a client of ours, you get that as the bonus, as part of how we bring that into your organization. The ultimate goal is to have this be standalone and have schools be able to buy it, homes be able to buy it, so that perhaps a children's book associated with it, because I do think rather childlike. So as you'll see by the conversational woods, so we think we can teach kids from a nursery school level to be on the listening path. So that's the longer vision and part of creating what we call the movement. And I'm wearing my Listening Matters t-shirt because we do want to create a movement where listening matters more than talking, telling, and knowing.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us here, and your message and your work and the difference you're making.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Well, thank you for helping get the story out. I appreciate that.
Yes. And you can find Christine at EQuipt-people.com and see Miles.
At EQuipt.
Yeah, EQuipt-people.com.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
In her social media. And we will, of course, have it in our show notes and links to it all, both on the podcast and on our YouTube channel, which is ReikiLifestyle.com or Reiki Lifestyle. Yeah, Reiki Lifestyle.
They know.
They know.
They listen to us.
Yeah.
Robyn's here. Robyn will help us.
Exactly.
We all need a Robyn. That's what I've.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you. And thank you to everyone that is listening.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone.